Thank you to the organizers, Jose Maria in the first place, for raising such an interesting topic, and to Giovanni for including it as a separate topic in our big group. My paper deals with a very provincial look at paper, how paper circulated and was used in an Ottoman Balkan city or a Balkan Ottoman city, whatever the preference would be. My paper will be structured in the following way. First, a brief overview of all the areas where I see paper in the lives of Balkan, let's say, rank and file and higher ranking Ottomans and Ottoman subjects. Then a brief discussion of my sources, and finally my findings or my where I see the paper in the lives of Sofians. To begin with, to tackle the issue of paper industry and the strange issue of Kağıthane, but also I'm jumping to one of the subtopics of my paper where the paper was coming from. Bulgarian paleographers have identified also the mention of not just Istanbul Kağıdı, but also Tevhislik Istanbul Kağıdı, Beylik Istanbul Kağıdı, Kesilik Istanbul Kağıdı, and also Helva, Kesilik and Kağıdı, which is very special, specific use, but I'll come back to some of these later on. So not many answers in my paper, but the short list of uses of paper that come to mind in Ottoman context. In the first place, these are all the records kept in the center, the minutes of the divan, to the more provincial use, the minutes or the Sharia court records. Records of appointments, records of which also are linked to issuing of individual documents, documentation for tax purposes, registers, but also receipts, where the actually each subject was supposed to receive, if although a small note, but still a receipt for having paid the tax. For example, non-Muslims for having paid regularly annually their jizya tax. Also, all those who owned land had a tapu, a title deed, and in the post-communist times, we saw how many tapu title deeds were preserved in the coffers of Bulgarians, because they immediately tried to restore their possession on land based on the Ottoman title deeds. But that again means that there was massive production just for that purpose. All sorts of legal documents, including individual, collective applications, grievances, including, for example, for the restoration of churches, which is one of the topics I'm interested in, applications of candidate Muslims and new converts, anything from divorces and other issues that, and as something that usually comes to mind first, this is the massive production of manuscripts, of notes, letters, documentation for everyday business. And I will mention in this subject also the use of talismans and amulets, to which I will come again. Uh, and the least obvious, which was mentioned yesterday, it is in everyday life, wrapping in trade, which I come across as well in larger quantities and in smaller quantities. And also something which, had I not read in my documentation, I wouldn't have thought of, but that is used for windows, paper instead of glass that we use today. So these are just in a very brief overview. So how do all these uses come surface in my sources, and what are my sources to begin with? My sources are probate inventories from the 1670s to the 1750s. Unfortunately, we do not have earlier, larger collections of probate inventories, so that limited my lower dating. And I'm still in the 18th century, mid 18th century, haven't processed the rest of the probate inventories that exist. That makes about 285 for the 17th century and 115 for the first half of 18th century. The large number for the 17th century is due to an intact register for the 1670s, but none for the rest of the decades. And those from the 18th century, unfortunately, come from several fragments, so not very massive material, still something like 400 inventories altogether. The problem with the inventories have been discussed, including by me, at length. It's first that they do not include all the deaths in the city in question or the region in question. And there is a disbalance between Muslims and non-Muslims. Let's say Armenians are almost non-present. If they're present, it's only because they're visitors. So nobody managed to take over the inheritance. Meanwhile, Jews are largely missing also from our records. So just occasional random appearances. There are also debates as to what extent these lists are actually representative. What do I mean here? Because even in those records, I see that sometimes an additional portion of the inheritance appears because someone had misappropriated, as they say. I mean, it was taken over, but the judges managed to put it back in the pool of the items. We are not sure also whether the prices are real. Sometimes there is suspicion that they are overpriced, sometimes underpriced due to different interests clashing. So the price of books and paper are not always, I mean, stable or acceptable even. Unfortunately, the probate inventories do not show us also the root of the items, where they come from. And this we have to consult with, for example, the books themselves, or with the filigrees, the filigrane, when it is just paper. The books themselves show sometimes with marginal notes, the root of a book. And I mean, including in Sofia, we have books, Qurans that were produced in Mamluk Egypt, went to Central Asia and finally landed in Sofia. But this you do not see in the inventories, you see it in the book itself. Sofia, what is Sofia? At that time, I have put a map in my presentation. Sofia is the center, and it was the administrative center of European Ottoman possessions, one of the most important, Rumeli. It was a trade hub which explains the presence of foreigners, significant groups, and attracting people from the groups associated with trade. In particular, it was also a seat of a metropolitan with substantial Jewish community, 4 different groups, and also an Armenian substantial community from the late 16th century related to the extension of the Silk Route. Dubrovnik merchant community, so a typical Ottoman Balkan city, as I said in the beginning, but of medium size, nothing compared to the Salonika or Edirne or even Filibe, Plovdiv, as a matter of fact. How does paper appear in Sofian probate inventories? Here are my 2 favorite inventories. I will talk more about them. This is one of a Bosnian Muslim merchant who traded in many other things, but also in paper. And the other one that I will show you is of an Armenian, my other favorite. The books that appear in the inventories are, let's say, 12–13% of the inventories contain a book. Not great readers, and it's mainly in Muslim inventories. Not great readers, not a great variety. The most frequently seen book is the Quran or subdivisions Enam, Sharif, or sometimes just Jews, but also sometimes Reader's Digest, Majmua, grammar, logic, hadith, occasionally history, philosophy, poetry, math, and astronomy, biographical dictionaries. I do not know how these books have appeared in their inventories, whether they were locally produced, whether they traveled. I will come back to this, but I know, jumping ahead, that there was, at least in the 18th century, someone identified as kitabcha, that is bookseller. I don't know what he sold though, because unfortunately I see him in his capacity of one of the wealthiest notables of Sofia, and I see him as giving, loans, money loans, but not as not in an inventory. The books are just one aspect of. As for non-Muslims, it's only in the 18th century that I see books in their inventories. Just one Christian, one Jew. The Jew, I think it was identified as Torah, and the Orthodox Christian, just one book. 17th century, however, we have this Armenian merchant who is my, as I said, my absolute favorite, and to whom I come back. The side use of the of books or of the Quran, however, is, as I mentioned, the amulets and talismans, which prominently feature in the inventories. Well, this is the so-called bazuband. That is something put on the shoulder, but often, apparently, and this I heard mainly from my Turkish students, they explained to me, and then I saw it in Istanbul being sold in small Qurans produced for talisman purposes, which are held either in under the shoulder or in other forms. The most used in my samples are the Hamailier, and I'm showing you here a Quran used as amulet. The or a single sheets of paper, again, either magic or counter magic. And sometimes, well, they were not very much liked by the ulama, but they existed. So paper, in my feeling, is that sometimes the Quran, when it is just one book, was actually, or the Anam Sharif, was not so much to be read, but had more protective purposes, served protective purposes. I see in one of the inventories a Futuvetname, which is an ethical code of a guild, probably, that is in the inventory of a bus attendant. Probably he was member of such a guild. A Ruzname, which I'm not quite sure what it means, but probably a daily cash book. I'm not quite sure that it can be interpreted as a diary. Just a register, whatever that means. And plenty of inventories contain scattered papers or just papers, whether it's empty papers, I mean just blank sheets, or whether they are written some kind of papers, but they are valid. I do not know. In only one case, we have the identification that this was Evraki Tefsir, I don't know, I mean, for the others. And finally, I was quite amused to see that in one inventory, there were 4 sealed letters, Memhor Mektub, which are also valid. They were in the inventory of a Bosnian person. Finally, something that I call, let's say, concealed or hidden presence of paper. Quite a number of inventories contain references to literacy, that is the presence of an inkpot, of pens, of pen-related items, but no trace of paper or of books. So my feeling is that at some point paper was present, but not registered, not recorded. In practice, as I said, wrapping and for windows, and this I see mainly in the inventories of merchants. The merchants who traded, who were the people who brought some kind of paper to to Sofia. Well, here is a Bosnian merchant. And to come back to to the inventory of a Bosnian merchant, it contained, apart from, it's very interesting, none of them specialized in paper trade, but obviously they traded also in paper. The Bosnian merchant had 2 books, probably for his own use, but also he traded mainly in textiles, leather items, which are specialty of Bosnians, cartridges, but he also had fishek, that is cartridge purses, but also çarçuba, kağıdı, yazı kağıdı, and kaba kağıdı. None of those sophisticated names that we heard from Tulay, but that Tulay is in Istanbul and I'm in Sofia. What I have here is frame paper, that is for windows, paper for writing, and rough paper, whatever that means. Don't know what it was used for. The price, it was in batches, so the price, obviously the writing paper was the most expensive one, and then we come to the one for the rough paper, which was the cheapest. Then I have also one local person in the 18th century who also traded in paper, but that's not even, there is no specification of the type. It was just sold in top, that is rolls, balls, and he had 5 balls in his inventory. The merchants also used paper for wrapping, and that is what I saw in the inventory of a book of Greek from Melnik, who traded in Sofia and who used extensively several distes, bunches of halvacı kağıdı. I don't know why helva was the focus, but obviously this was probably the greasiest, don't know. And as I said, my absolutely favorite inheritance in this presentation is an Armenian, a member of the so-called Ajam Taife, or people coming from Persia, not known place of origin, who traded mainly in silk, traditional for the Armenians, but who also carried, apart from one book for his own use, obviously, and a defter, probably to take notes. He also carried a number of, and this is the record, 280 books, copies of one book, which is the Psalms of David, with the Injil, the Evangelium, escapes me the word now. What was, I mean, I tried to identify the book, because 280 copies of one book, definitely he was trading in books. I think I identified the book, the Psalms, published by one of the most famous Armenian publishers, Voskan Yerevanci, who published the first and one of the most attractive, beautiful Bibles, not only for Armenians, but in general, from the 17th century. He published it in Amsterdam, but then traveled via Livorno, and obviously a year before his death, he settled in Marseille, where he published the Psalms. In 1673, my Armenian merchant passed away in Sofia in 1675, and I believe that this was what he actually was trading with. I'm quite amazed that each of the books contained 416 pages, if I'm right in the identification. So 280 copies, 400 pages each, was just one of the items of his merchandise. And he obviously traded with these books, or aimed to trade in Sofia and to disseminate in the Balkans. With this, I will end my presentation, because my feeling is that I went beyond my time. The paper was obviously part of the lives of almost everybody, if not everybody, in the provinces. Not beautiful paper, but paper in every respect, from business to essential life. Thank you.